Okay, now we're going to talk about welfare economics. What is welfare economics? Welfare economics is how the allocation of resources affect economic well-being. Does having free trade makes people better off or worse off? How exactly do you measure well-being? What's the meaning of better off in economics? Right? What is better off? Does it mean that having more money? But if I give you more money, but at the same time raise the price of every product, that wouldn't be better off, right? So what's the meaning of better off? And if one person gets to buy more stuff, and another person gets to buy less, how can we say whether the economy is better off or worse off as a whole? Right? Any economic policy will result in winners and losers. How you aggregate the benefits and losses. We will start with a very simple baseline. Efficiency. Efficiency means, is there something to be gained without hurting someone else? This baseline is relatively uncontroversial because if there is something to be gained without hurting anyone else, there's no reason why you don't want it, right? If I'm telling you there are some free textbooks lying around, well, you're probably going to get one, even if you don't need it necessarily, right? It's free. Doesn't hurt anyone to get one. So efficiency is a simple baseline because it's uncontroversial. If we can improve some people's well-being without hurting anyone else, go for it. To illustrate how economists measure well-being, we're going to use 4 individuals here. Right? John, Paul, George, and Ringo, they each have a 1 unit demand as long as the price is low enough. Remember last time we talked about this. This is like a CD album. You only need one, and you're going to buy it as long as it's cheap enough. So we have 4 individuals. They each have a different willingness to pay. That gives us a somewhat nice demand curve, as you'll see in a moment. So John is willing to buy 1 unit as long as the price is at or below 100. Since he's at most willing to pay 100, we call that his willingness to pay. So that's just a name. The number 100 is his willingness to pay. That's what he's willing to pay. Why was someone willing to pay a certain price? If I ask you, how much are you willing to pay for an iPhone? How much will you be willing to pay for an iPhone? 7,000, 8,000, 9,000? A lot of money. Why? Why that much? So, anyone actually using an iPhone here? Let's see. Anyone using an iPhone? Okay, why do you like an iPhone? Huh? You love the love of Apple. Right, but let's say without the brand, okay, the brand is worthwhile, but what are features? Okay, what if I ask you, let's say if we keep everything your iPhone has, like the same feature, the same content, the same look, except I change the Apple logo to Xiaomi. That's exactly what Xiaomi does. So I think it's a very legitimate example. How much less would you be willing to pay? At least, so $3,000 less.
Yeah.
Wow, that's like half price. Okay, so the Apple brand is worth $3,000. All right. So anyone else using an iPhone? No? You use an iPhone. Okay, so except the brand, what do you like about your iPhone? You just hate Android. All right. So it's like, can always buy like something like, I don't know, what else do you have now? Windows Phone? Like, okay. So you hate one. What about, okay, who else? Well, so many iPhones here. What do you like about your iPhone? Convenience, okay. So, if I take away the convenience of your iPhone, so you keep the look, right? You keep the look, keep the logo, right? But no, it's not convenient. How much less would you be willing to pay for your iPhone? So it has the look, it has the logo, but it's not convenient anymore. You won't pay anything for it, okay? So it's useless, right? So why would you be willing to pay so much money for an iPhone? Well, it must be that it gives you some benefit, right? So just now, sometimes it's the brand or it's the brand identity. You're willing to pay $3,000 for that. Sometimes it's the convenience. That's actually worth like $7,000. And for some people, this is like a statement, right? I hate Android, and that's worth $7,000 already. Okay. In fact, anyone actually not personally using an iPhone, but nevertheless purchased some iPhones, like when iPhone 7 came out? Anyone actually purchased iPhones just in order to sell them? No one? Oh, think again, right? Even if you don't like iPhones, you know that the iPhone 7 Plus Jet Black Edition would fetch for a very high premium if you just resell it somewhere, right? It's pretty amazing. Like my sister does that. Like, and she earns more than I do. In like her salary is higher than mine. Yes, she still spends this time trying to buy like iPhones and resell them during weekends. Well, okay, so but there are money to be made. Like you can probably get $1,000 or two from selling the Jet Black Edition. Okay, so in this case, people would be willing to pay for the iPhone because there is value in getting an iPhone and reselling them. In any case, the willingness to pay is you can use it to measure the benefit a buyer expects from an item, right? You pay $7,000 because, well, it gives you $7,000 of benefit. Maybe $3,000 of that is the brand identity, $4,000 of that is the functionality, but then that adds up. That's what the phone gives you in benefit. So, for this reason, we're going to use the price that consumers are willing to pay as a measure of benefits they get from a product. And where do we get the price? Nowhere else but the demand curve. Right? So if you have a demand curve, the demand curve is made up of individuals' willingness to pay. In fact, so this is from what we have just now. John is willing to pay 100 to buy 1 unit. Paul is willing to pay 80 for 1 unit. George is willing to pay 70 for 1 unit, and Ringo is willing to pay 50 for 1 unit. So these people's individual demand together give us a market demand, and that means the market demand, in some sense, represent the gains they would get from participating in the market. If you give them each an iPhone for free, okay, I didn't actually say what product it is, but if you each give them 1 unit of the product for free, how much benefit would they get? Well, they already told you, John is willing to pay 100, Paul is willing to pay 80, George is willing to pay 70. That's the benefit they expect from the product. So you can use the area beneath the demand to measure the benefit they get. So, the area beneath. So, these days I don't sell. Yeah, in the past, I actually auctioned off a bottle of soda, like glass bottle soda. But I don't really drink soda anymore, so I don't have any of them to auction off. Like, I can try auctioning off a can of soda, but it's not going to be fetch as high a price as a glass bottle of soda because most of you have most of you can buy glass bottle of sodas on your own, so it's worth a lot more. Okay, so we now call this measure consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is the difference between what consumers are willing to pay for the product and the price they actually pay. And that's the area beneath demand and above the price they pay. Okay, for example, let's say the price is, right? I want to start with a higher price. Let's say the price is 75. Right? The price is 75. So consumer surplus is calculated as the difference between calculated as the difference between the price and the demand. So for John, he's willing to pay 100, he's only paying 75. That means he has gained $25 of benefit from participating in this market. Paul's willing to pay 80. He's only paying 75, so he's gaining $5 from participating in this market. So in total, we say that the consumers gain from this market is 25 plus 5 equals to 30. Right? So it's the area beneath demand and above the price they pay. Just here. Okay. Why is it attractive? What's so attractive about consumer surpluses? The calculation can be done with just the knowledge of demand curve and price. In particular, it allows us to circumvent the fact that we don't know consumers' actual utility. Right? You can't observe utility. You don't know in fact, you don't know what people's preferences in general, unless I explicitly ask you, what do you like? But you can't do that for hundreds or thousands of customers. So usually you don't know what people's preference is. How do you measure their well-being? Well, consumer surplus gives us away. All we need to know is the demand and the price they pay. The difference between the two gives us a measure of how better off they are by participating in this market. It's quantitative, it gives us a number. It does not just say you're better off or worse off, it actually gives us a number, allowing us to compare different scenarios. Right? If we only have a better off and worse off, if we only know whether what happens when there's lower price? Let's imagine the price goes down from 75 to 65. All right, now the price is 65. Here we are. Remember the price previously was 75. This is where the previous price was, right? What's the difference between the two? There are two differences. First, now when you compare the gains made by John and Paul, a lower price gives them more surplus. They now gain an addition $10 from the lower price, each of them. So lower price benefits existing customers. They pay an even lower price, keeping the money. It also benefit George, who wasn't buying anything. This is 5. George wasn't buying anything previously, but now he is, and that's a gain. Right? This is expanding the access to more people. So George is gaining when he previously wasn't. So together that gives you the benefit of lower price. More surplus for existing customers and surplus for new customers. Well, wouldn't it mean that a lower price is always better? A lower price always gives consumers more surplus. Wouldn't you be really happy if the price of an iPhone is like $50? In fact, I think you'd be pretty happy if iPhone is actually selling for the price of Xiaomi. Wait, that's Xiaomi, right? I think if you think about it, why don't you buy a Xiaomi Air instead of a MacBook Air? It looks the same. It's even called the same, right? You can always put a sticker at the back with the Apple logo. Why not? Why not just have? Wouldn't it be nice if if prices are really, really low from the society standpoint? For iPhones, it might not be too obvious what's the problem. But if you think about something like more valuable, like water or what else? Let's say I think water or electricity. Actually, I think these are good examples. Let's say water. Would it be socially beneficial for water, I mean fresh water, to be completely free? No. Why not? What would happen if water is completely free? If you open your tap, you pay zero. What would happen? Well, why bother closing your tap? Right? Just keep the water floating, right? And why bother be conscious about your water usage? Just take an hour-long bath like every day. Right? Why not? And you're gonna. The problem with price being too low is that you ignore. So consumer surplus is an attractive feature. It gives us a measure of consumers' well-being as given by themselves through the demand curve. So one issue is that, as I already mentioned, it doesn't actually consider the cost of production. Okay, here's another issue. Drug addiction. Think about this example. So drug addicts are willing to pay a lot of money for drugs. So heroin, cocaine, they're willing to pay a lot of money for drugs. So their willingness to pay is very high. Given our definition of consumer surplus, that would mean the benefit they get from drugs is very high. Wouldn't it be socially optimal then to provide them with all the drugs they need? Because they're willing to pay so much money.
But they are not rational.
Okay, so that's the problem. Do you trust the buyer's preference in this case? When you're talking about things like drug addiction, smoking, gambling, do you trust people's preference? Because you have to trust people's preference in order to use demand curve as a measure of the benefit they get. If they are irrationally paying a high price, then what they are willing to pay is not the same as how much benefit they get from the product, right? So this is an issue you have to consider. So we have to mention this already. Now, for the first one, we're going to come back to that later on. For the second, we should consider the seller's welfare too. The seller's welfare represents the cost of production. So that has to be considered. And let's say you have a supply curve, and remember what we talked about just on Tuesday. Supply curve comes from marginal cost curve whenever there is competition. Until we talk about monopoly, we will assume that there is competition in the market. We will talk about what happens when you don't in the topic of monopoly. So, we will define a similar concept as consumer surplus called producer surplus, which is the difference between price paid by consumers and, well, I'll say that's the price received by sellers and the cost of production, right? So producer surplus is simply the difference between so this is the difference between the price sellers receive and how much it costs them to produce. That's, in some sense, measuring how much money they earn from participating in the market. Okay, so in this case, this is plus 350 for the first unit, plus 250 for the second, and plus 50 for the third. So the total producer surplus is 650. Okay. Is it really the same concept as consumer surplus? You are using the supply curve to infer what seller's cost is, and then the difference between the two is the benefit the seller gets from participating in this market. Now, why don't we consider fixed costs? Why don't we consider fixed costs? Remember, we are measuring the benefit of participating in this market, right? If it's a fixed cost, do you have to pay it even if you're not participating in this market? It's like factory, right? If you have already purchased the factory, you have to pay for the factory even if you do not participate in this market. So fixed cost is irrelevant when it comes to the benefit of participating in the market, because even if you don't participate, you still have to pay for the fixed cost, right? So that's why we only use the part which is variable. That's the benefit. That's the cost that you only incur when you participate. Okay, so same idea. Higher price benefits seller in two ways. One, higher price raises. Ooh, that's the problem. I already used a very high line, so I'm going to draw a lower one. But that's 700, right? If you raise the price, you also raise the benefit for existing sellers, and you allow new sellers to enter or new supplies to appear, right? So interesting. That's beneficial for sellers. In this course, you have to know how to calculate these areas: rectangle, triangle, circle. These three will appear whenever you need to calculate consumer surplus, as you will see. Okay, as you will see, whenever we look at triangle, just like that song, like start ringing in my head. That song. It's a triangle. What do you see? What do you see? You have a side. You have a side. Right? Yeah. It was like we should try to incorporate like a song somewhere here, right? Yeah. Actually, on Tuesday, another song was ringing in my brain in my mind when I was talking about all these production processes. So, like you have like television panels television panel was made from sand. You have like concrete was made from sand. Computer chips was made from sand. So what do you have? What song do you have? It's all sand. It's all sand. It's all sand. Okay. Now, let's say you have a demand and supply diagram. Just ignore what I said. Price is $4. Consumer surplus is between demand and above price. Producer surplus is below price, above supply curve. And now, this is $4. So consumer surplus is the trapezoid that has a height of 10 minus 4 a whiff of something we haven't figured out yet. Okay. So the price is 4. As you see on the diagram, the sellers are not willing to sell that many. Exactly how many are they willing to sell? That's 2 times 4 minus 5, which is 4. Wait, no. 2 times 4 minus 5 is 3. I did it right? It's 3. It's correct. You have to find the point at the top right corner. So what is that? That's the willingness to pay of consumers when the quantity is free. So consumers' willingness to pay when the price is free, or when the quantity is free. So free equals to QD. That's 10 minus P. Okay. Right, so we already know this is 4, this is 3. What is this point? This is 3 equals 10 minus P, P equals 7. Right, so the trapezoid of consumer surplus has a height of 10 minus 4, base of 0 to 3, and the short height would be 7 minus 4. Alright, so you need to find the area of that. I hope you remember how to find the area of that, because that's supposed to, so that's 10 minus 4 plus 7 minus 4 multiplied by 3 divided by 2. So that's 6 plus 3, 9, 9, 3, 27 divided by 2, 13.5. Producer surplus is just a triangle. That's easy. This is 0 to 3. So 0 to 3. 4. You need the vertical intercept here. That's when quantity is 0. 0 equals to 2p minus 5. P equals to 2.5. So 2.5. So that's 2.5. That gives you 4 minus 2.5 times 3 to divide by 2, which would be 2.25. Okay? Okay, so that's the math you're going to face in midterm. Finding the area of trapezoid and triangle. Right? Not too difficult. Should be able to do it pretty easily. There's another one in the previous page that I didn't do. But something you would notice if you do enough of this is you realize consumer surplus plus producer surplus always build up the area to the left of the quantity produced. Right? It always build up the area between demand and supply to the left of the quantity produced. And it actually makes a lot of sense. It should be that way, as we will explain in a moment. But you should notice if you try different values, it will always be the case. Consumer surplus plus producer surplus is always filling up the area between demand and the supply on the left of the quantity produced. So this is called total surplus. See, consumer surplus plus producer surplus. And now let's think about why it makes sense that it should fill up the area completely. Let's think about this. What is consumer surplus? Consumer surplus is value to buyers minus price paid by buyers. Producer surplus is price, the amount received by sellers minus the cost for production. But in a market transaction, the amount paid by buyers equals to the amount received by sellers, so these two numbers cancel out. So when you add them together, total surplus equals to the value to buyers minus the cost to sellers. That gives us a meaning. Total surplus is measuring the value of the product net of cost. So it's the benefit the society gets from the product being made. Right? Total surplus measure the benefit to the society for the product being made, for the product to be produced. So that's why we use it to measure well-being. How much does the society gain from having this market? Well, that's total surplus. Value to buyers minus cost to sellers. There are reasons, as we mentioned, there are cases where, like drug addiction, where you don't want to trust the buyer's demand as the value to buyers, at least not to the society, or not from the society's point of view. Those cases, this argument might not hold, but otherwise, for many products, this would be a reasonable measure of how the society has benefited from having this market. So, given that the total surplus is the area between demand and supply left of the quantity produced, how do you maximize total surplus? How do you maximize total surplus? Now, price itself is not the concern, because the high price benefit sellers, hurt consumers, low price benefit consumers, hurt sellers. Price is not the major concern. What we're interested in is what maximizes the total. What maximizes the total? Now, if you look at the diagram like this, it's very obvious what maximizes the total. You should move the quantity to the market equilibrium. That would give you the largest surplus. So that's where you should go. That gives you the largest surplus. Right? So this, if you think about it, is an argument for free trade. We are saying that the market equilibrium, where people get to buy freely and where seller gets to sell freely, would result in a situation where total surplus is maximized. Anywhere else, for now, we haven't talked about how you can actually force quantity to be somewhere else. But if you force quantity to be elsewhere, anywhere else would result in less total surplus. If you force the quantity to be relatively low, then you're not producing some units here where the benefit to the buyers are actually higher than the cost to produce those units. If you go beyond, you'll be in a case where it costs more than the benefit it gives the consumers. So neither would be ideal. It's right at the market equilibrium where the total surplus is maximized. So it's deceptively simple in the diagram, but it's actually a very strong statement. It's saying that if you allow people to trade, you would. So we have a name for that. If it is such an important result, it deserves a name. And it's called the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. What's so funny about it? You know, if you find it so funny, you should go study welfare and try to prove it. Now, then you'll find it very funny. It's good. Mathematically, the first fundamental theorem is more difficult than it's relatively difficult at the undergraduate level, but it's not particularly difficult. It's not too difficult to prove if you're good at mathematics. And obviously, when you prove it, you're not going to prove it for just one market. You're going to prove it for the whole economy with many, many markets. So, but still, the idea is the same. Is that the market equilibrium is efficient. There's no gains to be made without hurting someone else. If you want to, so in this situation, the consumers and producers both get some surplus. What we mean by there's no gains to be made without hurting someone else is, if, as a government, for example, as a government, you want to increase consumer surplus over what the market equilibrium can give you, you would have to reduce the surplus of producers. Right? There's no other way. You have to reduce the surplus producers. Typically, you can imagine, that's usually a policy of price control. You artificially lower price. But when you artificially lower price, you hurt sellers. Similarly, if you want to benefit sellers, you would have to artificially raise price, one way or the other, and that hurts consumers. The free market is not worse than any of those, and usually much better. Okay. There are some conditions that for this to hold. One is that there must be competition. There must be competition. If you have no competition, this is not the case. For example, let's say in most likely cases where you have a monopoly, a single seller that sets the price very high. In this case, if the government forced the seller to lower the price, it might actually benefit everyone. So that case actually would not be true. The thing is, even the difference between, so even though when you force the monopoly to lower the price, you lower its surplus, right? So you might think that, well, wouldn't that be bad? Okay, so it's true that you lower the surplus of the seller, if it lowers seller. But by moving closer to the market equilibrium, the gain in consumer surplus is higher than the loss in producer surplus. When the seller set the price, think about the extreme case, right? If I sell just a single unit, I can set the price extremely high, but then the consumers would have a tiny, tiny bit of consumer surplus. Or, like if there's only one single item in the world, you can sell for a lot, but it's not going to be beneficial to most consumers. If the price goes lower, the consumer will gain a lot of surplus, and theoretically, you can use part of those gains to compensate the seller, making him just as well off as before. But the consumer will still have some leftover gain that they can keep. So that's the meaning. When you move closer to the market equilibrium, you can keep the producer's surplus at the same level by some sort of compensation from the consumer, and the consumer will still be better off. That's the topic in monopoly we will talk about. And finally, as I said, you have to think about whether you trust the buyer's valuation of benefit. You also have to question whether the sellers are accounting for cost correctly. And the biggest problem is usually pollution. If my production process generates a lot of smoke, it generates a lot of wastewater, and I just throw them out without treating them, someone has to bear the cost. Either the government has to clean up, or people will just get sick. That's cost to the society. And if that's not considered by the seller, what you will have is overproduction, too much pollution. And that's that, and that's what we're going to talk in externality. All right, so we're going to end today, and we're going to come back next week, and we'll talk about market intervention. Okay, market intervention. So I usually talk about market intervention after the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics, because the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics is the cornerstone of why we can talk about the impact of market evaluation, market intervention. So the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics says that free market is good because it's efficient. So because the free market is efficient, we can use it as a benchmark. Look, there is this system, namely free market, that is efficient, generally speaking. So now you want government to come in to do something. Is it going to be better? What's the impact going to be? And the criterion we're going to use is total surplus. So it gives us a very intuitive way of comparing the welfare in different scenarios. So we're going to talk about these four: tax subsidies, price link, price floor, and quota. Well, that's 5. And tariff we don't usually talk about much because it's pretty much just like tax, but on foreign goods. So I'm going to talk about mostly the first five. And you would see that I use the terms consumers and buyers interchangeably, producers and sellers interchangeably, depending on the market we're talking about. So, we start with tax. What is tax? Now, on a supply and demand diagram, a tax would be, well, you have to draw it, you have to think about whether it's a tax on buyers or a tax on sellers. Which one is more common? Tax on buyers or tax on sellers? Why? Yeah, easier charge. That's mainly the reason, right? Imagine now in Hong Kong, we don't have a lot of sales tax. Most of the items are tax free, but for a few items there are tax. One would be gasoline. So petroleum, well, gasoline. So gasoline, if you do you know how much the gasoline tax is in Hong Kong? When you go to fuel up a car with gasoline, how much of that is taxed? Do you know like how much gasoline costs in Hong Kong right now? It's about $14 something, like $14.80 per liter, right? So $14, like something like $14.70 or 80 cents per liter. Of that, $6 is taxed. $6, so it's quite a lot, right? It's like 40% tax. Gasoline is taxed really. Actually, it's not. It's more than that, right? So yeah, it's 40% of the price is taxed. So gasoline is taxed really heavily, and the reason we'll talk about later. But gasoline tax is collected when you fill up your gas tank in the gas station. So the gas stations pay tax. Why not? So that's a tax on the sellers. Gas station tax on gas station. Why not tax each car owner? Well, think about it, right? Hong Kong has, I think, nowadays something like 800,000 cars in Hong Kong. If you want to tax the sellers, you would have to tax 800,000 individuals. Versus gas stations, Hong Kong maybe have like 100 gas stations. Which one is easier? It's very clear. For that reason, most of the time, we will consider tax on sellers. It's more common. Although there are cases where you have tax on buyers too. Very rare because it's hard to implement. One example would be sales tax in California and some places, similar other places. So now in many places in the United States and Europe, you have to pay sales tax. That is, when you go out and buy something, you have to pay an additional amount to the government. In California, the tax rate is almost 10%. It's 9.75. Right, it's almost 10%. So, 10% tax whenever you buy something. Not every state in the United States has sales tax though. And in particular, Oregon State, which is right above California, has no sales tax. None. Right. So as an individual consumer, that would give you a very strong incentive to go to Oregon to make a purchase, right? Or at least order online from Oregon or something. Because Oregon has no sales tax, California has a 10% sales tax. Imagine you're buying an iPhone. iPhone costs you $7,000, right? You have to pay $700 in tax in California. But if you buy it from Oregon, no tax. You save $700. That's like 10% off. So you can imagine a lot of people have incentive to either basically buy things from Oregon or purchase online and have it shipped from Oregon. Right. Now California is not dumb. Like it actually, in its law, it has a provision saying that if you buy things from elsewhere without paying tax, you should voluntarily pay the Californian government the tax rate charged by the Californian government. So if you buy something from Oregon State, you are supposed to pay sales tax on your own, right? So that's a tax on buyers. You're supposed to pay on your own. The thing is, guess how many people actually do that? Pretty much none. Like, if I don't have any records of purchase, how are you supposed to charge me anyway? So it's not a very effective system, but it does exist. So we're going to illustrate tax as a seller. Turns out it doesn't actually matter theoretically whether you tax on seller or tax on buyer, but practically we can talk about that later on. Okay. So as tax on sellers, it's an upward shift in supply curve. That is, for every quantity supplied, the seller wants to charge a higher price for the very simple reason they have to pay tax. When that happens, price would go, the equilibrium price would go up, and so does the equilibrium. The price would go up, but the quantity will come down. Now, the vertical distance between the two supply curves here is the tax amount per unit. So in this way, I draw it. Each unit gets taxed a constant amount regardless of the price the seller wants to charge. So in this case, as you see, even if the price is 0, the government is still going to charge a tax. This is the way gasoline tax works in Hong Kong. Regardless of how much the gas station wants to charge, there is going to be $6 tax. So as a percentage of the overall price, gasoline tax has become a lot more significant this year than previously. In just like barely 2 years ago, gasoline would be $17 or $18 in Hong Kong per liter. So and the tax is still 6%. It's still $6. So $6 out of $17 is a lot less than $6 out of $14. So in Hong Kong, that's exactly the way gasoline tax works. But in many places, sales tax work as a percentage of the price. So for example, I just mentioned California, sales tax is 10% of the purchase price. So it would not look like this, the diagram. The diagram, how would it look like? If you draw that case, I have to be careful because once again I forgot that I should modify the slide such that it won't skip. If you have a diagram, right? A percentage tax would be, so I would actually make it easier by starting from the origin. All right. If the price is 0, as a percentage of 0, it would be 0. The tax would be 0, right? Price is 0, 10% tax is still 0. So what we would get is something like this. A supply curve with percentage tax would look like this. It basically starts from if it starts from 0, price 0, then it would start from the same point, and it has a steeper slope because it goes so faster, right? But most of the time we're going to focus on this case because in terms of drawing, this case is easier to draw, right? Okay. And the reason why the supply curve should shift up exactly by the amount of the tax rate is that the seller, under competition, we have already mentioned last time, actually it's the time before. Yes, it's actually last Tuesday. We have mentioned that supply curve is marginal cost curve, right? I'm selling you at the cost of the producing that last unit. If the government charge me, that increase my cost, so I have to pass on the cost to you. Right? To make it easy to see the effect of the effect on various parties, I've labeled the diagram of A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and let's see what happens. Let's start with the consumer. The consumer have the old consumer surplus of the triangle above the original price and below the demand. So that's this blue triangle here, right? A, B, C, D. What if you have a tax? With a tax, the supply curve shifts up, resulting in a higher price, and because we're talking about the area between price and demand, the area would be a lot smaller with the tax, just A. So consumer loses a lot under tax because price is more expensive. What about sellers? Do sellers like tax or not? Well, no. No one likes tax. Okay, so let's start with the seller. The seller's original surplus is the area beneath the price but above supply curve. That's this purple triangle, EFGH. EFGH. Now, with a higher tax, the supply curve shifts up, and if you draw the same area, it's going to be B and E. However, B and E does not completely overlap with EFGH, making comparison difficult on a diagram. Fortunately, here is where high school geometry comes to rescue. You have two parallel lines, right? They're two parallel lines touching the same vertical line here. So this B and E, BE is of the same area as H. That's something you learn, right? This is something, one of those sine angle side thing. Like, that's something you should have learned. So, H, right? So sellers lose out, right? Because tax. One thing that is interesting, so now both the buyers and the sellers lose out. What does that tell you? That tells you that the sellers cannot completely pass the tax burden to the buyers. You can't say that I raise my price and I expect to pay no tax. I will just have no effect. No, that's not the case. Why? Well, I'm the seller. I raise my price exactly by the amount of the tax. That's my intent. The problem is, when I do that, you have law of demand, right? Higher price means less demand. So the buyers are buying less. And I might have to go on a discount. So in the end, you cannot just say I'm going to raise my price by the exact amount of tax and expect the same number of customers buying from you. That's not going to happen. When you raise the price, there will be fewer customers. That would reduce your income as a seller. So sellers get hurt too. Who gets to gain? Who charge tax? Government. So the government is going to get something. How much? The government is going to get this much. I'm going to use what color can I use? Let me just use orange, right? Like, I know what you're thinking. So, how much does the government get? So the government gets for each unit they get the tax dollar per unit, that's vertical distance, and the number of transactions is going to be this much. So the government gets this box of tax. That's BCEF. Now let's add up everyone's gain and losses and see what we get. So consumers get A, B, C, D initially, and sellers get E, F, G, H. So that's the old total surplus. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. And as you look, it's the whole area beneath demand above supply. As we mentioned, free market maximizes surplus. So that's what we have. What about under the tax? With tax, consumer gets A, producers get BE, A, B, E, plus the tax revenue by the government, B, C, E, F. If you take a look, you're missing D and G. D and G. So, where's D and G? D and G is right here at the corner. This is where D and G is. This is where D and G is. And what happened? Well, once again, remember what's the effect of tax. You tax the seller has to pay for the tax, so the seller raised the price. When the seller raised the price, fewer consumers want to buy, resulting in a smaller transaction volume. From last Tuesday, we have mentioned that total surplus depends on output. Right? Total surplus is measuring how much stuff is being produced, essentially. Is everything that is worth being produced? And in this case, it's not. The seller raises price, buyers buy less than the free market. So you're not reaching the output level of free market. In this area, what you have is demand is higher than supply, right? Demand is higher than supply, as we mentioned last time. Demand represents the value of the product to the buyers, and the supply represents the cost to the seller. So this area, the value of the product is higher than the cost of the product, so it's efficient to produce them. But we are not producing them because the government is charging the tax, sellers have to raise price, so consumers do not want to buy. So these consumers are willing to pay a price higher than the cost of production, but they're not willing to pay a price higher than the cost of production plus tax. So they won't be buying, and that's inefficient. This area is called deadweight loss. Deadweight loss. It's gone. No one gets it. Now, this is why tax policy is distorted. Generally, whenever government uses a tax to collect revenue, it inevitably affects people's behavior. When you apply sales tax, people buy less. So, can we use different form of tax? Yes, you can consider. In Hong Kong, we have income tax, but you have the same problem. Income tax is essentially a tax on workers, right? And workers are suppliers of labor. So if you have income tax, what would happen? Fewer people work because it's not worthwhile to take a job that pays very little when you have to pay sales tax or pay income tax. What about corporate tax? Corporate tax is a tax on profit, right? So you reduce profit earned by companies. What would happen? Well, some companies might decide not to invest because the reward is not enough to cover the cost involved, right? So the cost, now by cost I mean not just like accounting costs, right? It also includes opportunity costs. So whenever government uses tax, inevitably you would distort the market. So the question is, which one is less damaging? Now, a lot of countries and some economists would argue sales tax might be less distorting than other forms of tax, because we don't want people not working, right? So you should avoid taxing income by too much. You don't want companies not investing, so you don't want to have a too high a corporate tax rate. But, well, consumption, do we necessarily afraid of people consuming less? Not necessarily, for two reasons. One, in many places you don't tax every single item. you might just tax luxurious items and exempt essential items like food. That's the way the United States work very often. Food is tax-free. Another reason is, for a lot of products, maybe it's essential, right? If I tax, even if I tax your food, it's not like you can go without food. So you are kind of forced to pay because you need to eat to survive. So for that reason, some people think sales tax is stable, a stable source of revenue. You're not as afraid of fluctuations. On the other hand, sales, unless you exempt essential items such as food and clothing, what you have is a tax rate on purchase would, in some way, discriminating against poor people. For the reason that I don't need 10 times more product, 10 times more purchase if I'm 10 times richer, right? Li Ka-shing won't have 1,000 times more clothes than we do, even though he's more than 1,000 times richer than we are, right? So rich people do not spend proportionately more money than poor people. All right? Now, what would you expect the effect of a tax to be? In Hong Kong, a very good example of a very I would say very effective tax. Effective as in the effect is very strong. A very effective tax would be the special stamp duty. So, can anyone explain what the special stamp duty does? No. You're gonna go unemployed when you graduate. If you're an econ major and can't explain what special stamp duty is. Right. Hong Kong, Hong Kong is a city, right? We have 7 million people. So naturally it's very crowded, and when in crowded places, real estate gets expensive. So in an attempt to control the rise of housing prices, the Hong Kong government implemented the following policy. First, any foreigners and companies buying real estate will have to pay double the amount of tax as usual. Now, if you are just a regular Hong Kong guy buying an apartment for the first time, you pay a stamp duty of 3.75%. So that's essentially a tax, right? Think about it. In Hong Kong, apartments goes by the millions, right? So you will be paying like hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax. Okay. If you are a foreigner or if you are a company, you have to pay twice that amount. So that's 7.5% in tax. Second, if you purchase an apartment and you sell it within 3 years, you also have to pay additional stamp duty. So you have to pay more tax again, right? In other words, the government makes it very expensive to buy real estate. If you want to buy an apartment, pay tax. Okay. So what happens? So the government did this. The government raised the tax because it believed that raising the tax can control housing prices. Can it? Right? So let's see. Okay, this is in Chinese, right? So this is saying that, well, for the 10 biggest apartment complex, transaction volume decreased, but the price kept increasing. Okay. This is Thai. Well, I don't know what's the English of Taikoo City. Well, this is one of Taikoo City. Is it? I'm not sure it's Taikoo City. Huh? It's what? Taikoo City. That's not very informative to foreigners. Okay, this is a rehousing estate in Hong Kong Island, which is the most expensive of all. Okay, so it's actually pretty old. It's like almost 50 years old now. It's very old. right? So, and it costs. This is actually from like 2 years ago. I think it's probably more expensive than that now. It's 17,000 Hong Kong dollars per square feet. So how much is that? That's like over 2,000 US dollars per square feet. Whenever I tell my American friends that, you know, 1 square feet, like this, right? 1 square feet will cost you 2,000 US dollars. They're like, what? It's just ridiculous. It's not even a house, right? When in the United States, everyone lives in houses. In Hong Kong, we're talking about living on the 50th floor, and it still costs you 2,000 US dollars per square feet. Oh, poor guy. Right. So it's very expensive. Now, so once again, the English version is similar. It's talking about what you have is the transaction volume in the secondary market have fallen from an average of 10,000 per month a month to about 3,000 a month. So we're talking about a 70% decrease in transaction volume with no obvious decrease in price. In fact, the price keeps increasing. If you read the newspaper every day, it's like, oh, it's like new high, a new high after another high. So it's not another high. Okay. So do we expect that? If you think about it, yes, we do expect that. If you raise the price, if you raise the tax rate, you would expect from what we have just now, the new equilibrium would have lower transaction volume and higher price. That's exactly what you expect. So we should not be surprised that the government policy would result in higher price and lower transaction volume, because that's exactly what the diagram is telling us. Okay. What would be a better way of controlling the rise in housing prices? Ultimately, the rise in housing prices is because you don't have enough housing. You don't have enough housing, right? That's why prices keep going up. Every year you have many people marrying. They need a place to live. So as long as housing stock is not enough to satisfy the demand, price would keep going up. So eventually you would have to solve the problem with more supply. Right? In Hong Kong, the Hong government does try to increase supply. So they're trying to. There's this term in Hong Kong called 盲搶地, right? And it's hard to translate in English. It's like, basically just basically aimlessly, ruthlessly looking for land to build apartments, right? But I think the reason why it's funny in Cantonese is because it's like it rhymes with 盲搶地, right? So it's so you need more supply. Now in Hong Kong, at least the government has very effective control over land supply. All the land in Hong Kong belongs to the government. Do you know that? All the land in Hong Kong belongs to the government. The government only rents out the land to you, right? So if you actually, when it comes to the time where you can buy an apartment, you will see it on a contract. It says that the lease lasts for however many years, right? Because the land is leased to you, not sold to you. There's only one plot of land in Hong Kong. There's only one single plot of land in Hong Kong that does not belong to the government. Do you know which one is that? History. There's only one single plot of land that does not belong to the Hong Kong government in the whole of Hong Kong. You know, anyone know which? Huh? No, those are also leased. So the right for new territory descendants to build an apartment, that's a right to build an apartment. It's not an entitlement to land. You have to find the land yourself before you can build. So which plot of land? You probably won't know unless you're really familiar with like history of Hong Kong in particular. the history of religion in Hong Kong. The only plot of land that does not belong to the Hong Kong government is the land beneath St. John's Cathedral in Central. The St. John's Cathedral belongs to the Anglican Church of Hong Kong. The Anglican Church, before the return to China, Anglican Church is the national church of UK. So the land beneath the cathedral is granted to the church by Queen Victoria. So it's land that belongs to the church, and that's the only piece of land in Hong Kong that does not belong to the government. So DNG is deadweight loss. Deadweight loss is the difference between market equilibrium. It's the difference between the total surplus under market equilibrium and the total surplus in the scenario in concern. Generally, pretty much always, deadweight loss will be somewhere around a triangle near the market equilibrium, because total surplus depends only on quantity. The well-being of the society depends on how much stuff we produce. So the less you produce, the less surplus you get. The difference is expressed by the triangle here. Now, as I mentioned, tax on buyers will be the same. So here we go. If you go the other way around, tax on buyers, you can try to do it at home and it will be the same. It will be the same. It's the same. The reason is under competition. If you tax sellers raise price, buyer buy less. If you tax buyers want less, resulting in also fewer transactions. So it's going to be the same effect. Subsidy is the opposite of tax. In fact, the mathematics is exactly identical, just on the opposite direction. Graphically, it's the supply curve going downwards because at every quantity the seller wants less. Okay, that's I think I mentioned before. Notice that it's possible that you have negative prices. It's possible you have negative prices if you have subsidy. Why? Well, if I, as the government, pays you for the number of units you sold, if I pay you enough, there will be an incentive for you to give away your product just to get my subsidy, right? Because you earn money from that. Does that happen in reality? Can you think of any example where sellers, broadly speaking, so we are going to define sellers broadly, right? Sellers. So can you think of any producer? I think producer might be a better term here. Any producer of good or service that is willing to provide its product for free. Huh? Retraining. So I suppose you mean some sort of like retraining provided by like something like BDC or like some public health charity organizations. That would be it. So I think general training, yes. Service provided by charity and social welfare departments, right? Think about social worker. Social worker provides service, right? Provide counseling, providing help to people in need. That's service. That's a desirable product. But do social workers charge their clients? No. Social workers, in fact, go out of their way to find people to help. So not only they are charging nothing for their service, they are actually paying a price to provide service. Why? Well, besides having a good heart, they also get paid by the government to provide such service. So it is completely possible to have negative price. Not only do I not charge you anything, I provide you with something so that you use my service because of subsidy. So once again, I label the diagram A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K. That's how many labels you would need in this case. So, all consumer surplus, let's start again. old consumer surplus is the area. Oops, this looks a lot darker than I expect. Maybe that's the wrong blue color. Here you go. Alright, so original consumer surplus is the area beneath demand above the original market price. Let's think about what happens when the government subsidizes. When the government subsidizes, the price goes down because the sellers are willing to charge a lower price, and the new price is here, so the area beneath demand and above price is going to be this green triangle, which is a lot bigger. It's A, B, E, F, G. A, B, E, F, G. Next, sellers. Sellers originally have an area E and H. That's the area they have. Now what happens? Lower price because the government is subsidizing, so the area beneath price and above supply curve would be HIJK. But HIJK does not overlap with E and H. What do? Same idea. Two parallel lines touching the same vertical line. So you get the BCEH is actually of the same area as HIJK. Right? BCEH is the same area as HIJK. It's the same. So that's why we can do that. So we're going to draw that. I think I used that yellow. Right? It's here. So the sellers gain B and C. Sellers gain, buyers gain. Well, there's no free lunch. The government has to pay B, C, D, E, F, G. Why is that? Why that amount? That amount is calculated in the following way. For each unit, the government has to subsidize the subsidy amount. The transaction volume is now higher at this point. So the government has to pay this orange rectangle as subsidy. Now we add up everyone's surplus. Originally, total surplus is A, B, E, H. Now it's A, B, E, F, G, B, C, E, H minus B, C, D, E, F, G, which equals to A, B, E, H minus D. So there is a deadweight loss of D, and this time around, the deadweight loss is on the right-hand side of the equilibrium, which is here. Okay. Why? What does it mean? Okay. When the government provides subsidy, things get cheaper. When things get cheaper, people buy more. So much more that it's, in fact, production occurs at a point where the cost of production is actually higher than the benefit to the buyers. It costs $10 to produce. It's only worth $7 to you. Normally, there's no deal, right? Cost me $10 to produce, cost you $7 to, worth only $7 to you. We can't agree on a price, right? Because it costs me more than how much it's worth to you. But if the government comes in and subsidizes $5, I can sell it to you for $5 and still earn the same amount of money as before. You can buy it at $7, and you're willing to pay up to $7, so you can actually buy it at $5. You are willing to buy it as $5. Government subsidy would make products artificially cheap, and when things are artificially cheap, people produce even if it's actually not worthwhile to produce. The government makes things too cheap. This is like buffet. Like when you go to buffet, usually you eat too much. Why? It's free, right? It's free. So you eat. Because we're not going to talk about subsidy on demand. Once again, subsidy on demand is the same as it will have the same effect as subsidy on sellers. If you draw a diagram, they will be the same. But okay, the example comes after price ceiling, actually. So after price ceiling, we're going to talk about the example. Okay, so next, we're going to talk about 3 methods of intervention that is a more direct control than tax and subsidies. In tax and subsidies, government provides you money or takes away money and allows you to adjust, allows the market price to adjust by itself. Price ceiling, the government says, nope, the price cannot be higher than that amount. Price floor, the government says the price cannot be below that amount. And quota, the government says you cannot sell more than that amount. Alright? Let's think about any example. Price ceiling. Do we have any examples of price ceiling in Hong Kong?
Special service.
Hospital service would be a good example. It's a bit weird. It's a bit weird because the government is kind of provided by the government, but for public hospital, it looks like a price ceiling. Why? Well, it's cheap, right? I mean, hospital is very cheap in Hong Kong. If you're not from Hong Kong, hospital is cheap enough. Yeah? Emergency room service is 100 Hong Kong dollars. Inpatient service is 68 Hong Kong dollars per day. That's 68 Hong Kong dollars, not 68 US dollars. In US, it will be 680 US dollars per day. Oh, so it's really cheap. So that's in some sense the price ceiling. Yeah. What else? Anything you think of? Things that government says cannot. So Hong Kong does not have rent control. So rent control usually is the example people like to use. But in Hong Kong we don't have rent control. So we don't have very good reasons. In Hong Kong, you have price control. Except hospital, you have price control in education. For kindergarten, if you want to be eligible for voucher, for the voucher system, like where government essentially pays the kindergarten for each student. If you want to be eligible for the voucher system, you cannot charge too high a price. Right? What else? There's something that came to my mind that I forgot now. Never mind. Alright. In some sense, right. Anything where you need government's approval for price increase, like NTR, the electricity, like tunnel, all of them need government approval. Price floor. Anything with price floor in Hong Kong. Huh?
Minimum wage.
Minimum wage is price floor, that's right. Okay, minimum wage, the idea of a minimum wage is price floor, that's true. In Hong Kong, I am not too sure minimum wage actually works too much as a price floor. Think about it. When even McDonald's pays higher than minimum wage, you're not talking about much of a price floor at all. Right? So in Hong Kong, I think that even though minimum wage is supposed to be a price floor, it's not a really effective one. Quota, any quota in Hong Kong. There's one big. Now Hong Kong is a free trade port, so we generally do not have quotas on things that's sold on the market. But there's one huge product that is in big demand that has a very strict quota, and you are all very fortunate enough to be able to purchase one. Well, not first, not first. You're here. That means when you are here, that means there are many students who are not here. The university education is a quota. We only have, in Hong Kong, the government artificially limits the number of places to 20%, essentially. Like, as much as we love to increase the number of units we take, we cannot do that because the government does not allow us to take that many students. So, quota. I think actually we have a quota on the number of university places in Hong Kong, at least within the big universities. Okay, so what happens to a price ceiling? Price ceiling means that you set a price that is lower than the market equilibrium price, otherwise it's not effective. So the green line, as you can see, is below the market equilibrium price. So it artificially limits how high the price can be. What happens? Let's see. All consumer surplus used to be A and B. Oh. Now, drawing on screen is something that is harder to do than drawing on paper, because if I'm drawing on paper, I just need to take a nice pack of crayons and then I can draw. Instead, I now need to click these tiny buttons. Right, A and B. What is the new consumer surplus? Now here's the part where you have to notice that it's not going to be a triangle anymore, because the price is lower. The price is lower, but sellers will not be selling many units because the price is low. So they're only going to sell this many units. They're going to sell this many units. So the new consumer surplus is a trapezoid, A plus C. Consumer might blink. As you can see, area C does look bigger than area B. In general, as long as the price is not ridiculously low, area C will be bigger than area B. Right? As you can see, as you get closer, area C becomes longer and area B becomes small. So generally, area C is bigger than area B unless the price is extremely low. If you try to push the price all the way to 0, then obviously no one's going to sell anything, and then you have no consumer surplus. Next, producer. Producer. Now the original producer surplus is C, D, and E. This triangle beneath price and above supply. Next, what happens when the government imposes a price ceiling? Bad for sellers. They just left with E because price is low. They can't, and the transaction volume is low, so they only left with E. So they lose C and D. Price ceiling is always bad for sellers. So you are trading off benefit to consumers with loss to sellers. Old total surplus A, B, C, D, E. New total surplus A, C, E. So you're losing B and D, which not surprisingly is the triangular area next to the market equilibrium. All right. Well, once again, it's not surprising. Total surplus depends on output. Whenever output is not reaching the level of free market, you would have loss. In this case, it happens in many places. The first example I'm going to use is gasoline. Now, gasoline is an international market, right? Oil get produced in Middle East, is shipped around the world to everyone. Because it's an international market, the price is influenced by the purchasing power of affluent countries like Hong Kong and America, and also by poor countries. So given that gasoline price is international, you can imagine that what looks like affordable to us would be unaffordable to people in developing countries, right? Our income in Hong Kong is like 10 times some developing countries. What it seems affordable to us would be completely unaffordable to them. What happens then? Well, it's typical for developing countries to subsidize gasoline. then that's the way Indonesia does it. Gasoline is subsidized. In China, they don't use subsidy. In China, there's a price limit. The government limits what the price of gasoline can be. Which one is better? Well, there's no free lunch. Neither is ideal. They each come with their own problem. Let's start with China. When you artificially lower the price of gasoline, when the international price is high, what happens? Now, if I need to, if a gas station need to import gasoline from overseas, it might not be able to turn a profit because the domestic price is artificially low because of the price ceiling and international price is high. What happens? Well, I'm not going to import a lot. And even for domestic company, if international price is high, domestic price is low, why don't I sell my gasoline overseas? Right? Look, if domestic price is low, international price is high, how do I make money? I sell all my gasoline overseas. So either way, that will result in a shortage in gasoline domestically. And that's what happened in China. In China, it's not uncommon to have to queue up to get gasoline. You have to line up in gas stations to get gasoline because gasoline is relatively cheap and there is not enough for everyone who wants it. Right. So that's what happens in China. Okay, so what are subsidy? Indonesia use subsidy. A lot of countries use subsidy. Well, the problem with subsidy is when international price goes up very quickly, what initially is a small subsidy can turn into a huge subsidy, and that is very expensive to maintain. Now in Indonesia, that's the problem. As I mentioned, a few years ago, when the gasoline prices becomes really expensive, so total subsidy for electricity could cost 32 billion, 20% of the budget. So imagine a country using 20% of your budget just on fuel subsidy. Now in Hong Kong, we have zero, right? In fact, we tax gasoline. So Hong Kong, we have zero. Indonesia spend 20% of their budget on subsidy. That's 20% of money you're not spending elsewhere. What could you spend that on? In Hong Kong, what item would cost the government around 20%? Education. The education costs the Hong Kong government about 20% of its budget. Healthcare. Healthcare costs the Hong Kong government about 20% of its budget. So we're talking about giving up all education or giving up all healthcare just to subsidize fuel consumption. You can imagine that would be brutal, right? In Hong Kong, starting from tomorrow, we just tell everyone, no more public health care. You have to pay. Or starting tomorrow, we're going to tell every school children, no more free education. Pay the cost if you want to go to school. And the cost is very high. Your education, you're paying $40,000 a year, but it costs you over $30,000. You're paying $40,000 a year, but it costs over $300,000 each year to educate you. Right? Don't look at me. I'm not highly paid. Look at some upstairs. Look here, like air conditioning, lights, big lecture theater, comfortable chairs. These all cost money. Right? So imagine how big an impact that would be if the government had to start subsidizing education. So that's what happens. So price control. If you use price ceiling, shortage. If you use subsidy, big budget deficit. Which one do you want? Your choice. I think did I mention the did I mention the example of Argentina? I think I mentioned it maybe over lunch. Did I? Did I ever mention Argentina? In class?
No, in class.
Okay, so Argentina is a very interesting example. If you read the news, international news, you might have heard of that Argentina is in deep trouble. Shelves are empty. You can't buy anything in Argentina. Like even basic supplies like bread and tissue paper. You can't buy any of them. Then that's despite Argentina being a country with the largest reserve of oil in the world. So, what happened? Now, what happened is Argentina is a very socialist country. It has all sorts of price control. And it has one very interesting form of control. That is, Argentina has free exchange rates. Have you ever heard of that? Free exchange rates. In Hong Kong, you have one, right? Pretty much it's fixed in 7.75, essentially. So it's right in Hong Kong, you can go from 7.75 to 7.85. This is basically just a very one exchange rate. In Argentina, you have free exchange rate. First, there is obviously the black market rate, which reflects market realities, and Argentina currency is very cheap. Right? As Argentina currency is very cheap, no one wants it. Then you have two government rates. There's a normal government rate, which is more favorable than the black market rate, and there's an additional rate for importing essential products, and that one is extremely favorable. We're talking about the rate for importing essential products like bread and tissue paper. That rate would be something like $1 to 10 Argentinian currency. I don't remember what that is. That's something starting with a B. Okay, so it's 1 to 10 for the essential. 1 to 10 for the for essential products. Then it goes down to something like 1 to 100 for the government rate, and it's like 1 to 300 or 500, something like that, for the black market rate. So there's a huge difference in rates, right? And if you think about it, so this is basically a subsidy. The government is essentially subsidizing importers. I give you foreign currency so that you can import food for our people. Right? That's the point. The currency, the favorable exchange rate is a form of subsidy. Except it's not implemented as a subsidy. It's implemented as an exchange rate. Now, using subsidy to lower the cost of living for your people is already difficult because it's expensive, as we see in this case. Using exchange rate to implement the subsidy is even worse, right? Okay, so let's say you are an importer. You are an importer, right? You know that you can get a lot of US dollars from the government, me. If you can get a lot of US dollars from me if you tell me that you're importing products that are essential. Okay, so you come to me, I give you $1 and you give me 10 Argentinian currency, right? 10 for me, 1 for you, US dollar for you. Okay, but you know the black market rate is $1 to something like 500 Argentinian currency. What would you do? Do you really spend that $1 single to import products for your country? No. You go out and immediately exchange it back to Argentinian currency, and you have 50 times profit immediately. So that's the problem with the Argentinian government policy. Pretty much any economist you ask will think that's a really dumb policy. Not only are you trying to subsidize, which is already expensive enough, you're trying to subsidize in a way that is very easy for importers to arbitrage away the difference. Right? You just Okay, $10 for it, $10 to me, I give you $1 US, you go out and get 500 Argentinian currency back. You come back to me and say, look, I need more. And then you can go through the whole process again. Right, price floor. Price floor is saying that price cannot go too low. So, you have to set it above the equilibrium price. Let's think about what happens. All right, let's start with consumer. This is not the original one. Original consumer surplus, A, B, C. The area beneath demand above free market price. Next, new consumer surplus, because the price is now higher, consumers don't want to buy a lot, it's just A. So consumers loses, right? You're forcing consumers to pay a lot, obviously consumers are going to lose. Next, sellers. Originally, sellers are earning the area beneath price, free market price, and above supply curve. Now you are forcing the sellers, forcing the buyers to pay more. Sellers get the area beneath price, but because the consumers are not buying a lot, it becomes a trapezoid. The yellow area, B and D. Now, as you can see, the area B does look bigger than area E. So, generally, it's possible for the sellers to gain. Right? Once again, same reasoning. As long as you don't push the price to extreme, seller usually gain. Total surplus, A, B, C, D, E. Neutral surplus, A, B, D. You're losing C, E, which once again is the area next, the triangular area next to market equilibrium. Now finally, quota. Quota is the government saying you can't sell too much. To be effective, obviously the quota has to be less than the market equilibrium. If you draw everything again, this is the point where I start getting really hungry. I've been talking about what? I've been talking for 3 hours, 15 minutes, so it's just natural that I should start getting hungry. Originally, it's A, B, C. Now, with the limit in place, the price, now what happens to the price? The government says, well, I am not limiting the price, I am just telling you that you can't sell too much. But when there is not enough supply, price goes up. So in the end, price is going to be relatively high because of the lack of supply. And the amount supplied, so consumers would bid up the price, and the price would be so high that only those who are willing to pay would be able to buy. So the new consumer surplus is A. Producer surplus. Producer surplus is the area beneath price and above supply. So this is the original producer surplus, this purple area. And finally, with the new quota in place, consumers bid up the price, resulting in a high price, smaller transaction volume, B and D. Okay. All total surplus A, B, C, D, E, new total surplus A, B, D, and resulting in a deadweight loss of C and E. Now, before I go on, notice, if you check your notes, the diagram for quota is exactly the same as the diagram for price floor. They have the same effect. When the government forces people to pay a lot, well, that would have the same effect as government limiting. That would have the same effect as government. That would have the same effect as government. That would have. So which one would government use? Well, that depends on your objective. Do you care about consumer welfare or do you care about producer welfare? If you care about consumer welfare, if you don't care about any, just use, right? Or tax, just use tax. Tax earns money. If you want to minimize the harm to consumers, price ceiling, which is why you have rent control. Although in the case of monopoly, we will talk about that later on. Yeah, just skip that now. If the government wants to minimize harm to producers, like minimum wage, price floor, right? So it depends on who you want to benefit. If you want to benefit consumers, price ceiling. If you want to benefit producers, price floor or quota. When you in Hong Kong, you have a lot of quotas too. I've already mentioned. Taxi license would be a good example of a quota. The government limits the number of taxi licenses because the government or there are other ones too. Taxi license, television station license, driving instructor license. These are all regulated by the government, and the supply is below what the market wants because the quota is very strict. All right. Finally, can we achieve equity? Solve a battery. So anyway. So the first fundamental theorem of web economics say market outcome is efficient. Market outcome is efficient. But efficiency only says that there's no gains to be made without hurting someone else, and the following scenario is efficient. One person having everything and everyone else has nothing. That's completely efficient. Because in order to give everyone else something, you have to take it away from that one person. So, in some sense, a country of slavery would be kind of efficient. Like, think about like ancient Egypt. Right? The pharaoh, everything belongs to the pharaoh. And you all are slaves, peasants, serfs. Like, you just have nothing. It's efficient. Think about it, right? The Egyptians managed to build big pyramids. We don't build pyramids today. They do it. They managed to do it with manual labor. It's very efficient. So it's efficient. But efficiency doesn't sound very much what we want. So the first fundamental theorem of web economics doesn't really say as much as we wish it does. It just says the market is efficient. And efficient outcome can be highly unequal. Okay, can we do better than that? Consider the following case. Sunil and Nobita. They both like remote control airplanes. And the supply of remote control airplanes is 2. Right? So it's given that Sunil is twice as rich as Nobita. Right? What happens? Okay, Sunil have more than twice the amount of money than Nobita does, so there's no way Nobita can compete with Sunil in buying model airplanes. So Sunil can buy both model airplanes, and Nobita will have none. Typical scenario when you watch Doraemon. That's just the way the story works every time. Okay, what happens? What happens? Whenever in every episode of Doraemon, you have Doraemon coming up with a gadget, something like that, right? And this time we're going to have this wealth transfer machine, right? In a typical way that Nobita abused Doraemon's gadgets, we're going to use the machine to give all of Sunil's wealth to Nobita. What would happen? Now, if you think about it, this is just a reverse of fortune, right? Now, instead of Sunil having everything, you have Nobita having everything, and Nobita is going to spend all of them on model airplanes, and Sunil will have nothing. Okay, is the outcome efficient? Is this efficient? In fact, both outcomes so far are efficient because one person having everything and another person having nothing is efficient. What would be inefficient if there's one model airplane not given to anyone? That's inefficient. But as long as both model airplanes here are given to someone, it's efficient. So both outcomes are efficient. Now, typically, it is time for Nobita to run into trouble, and Doraemon to save him from getting worse. So we have a a middle ground. Yeah, let's imagine we can use the machine to evenly divide money between the two of them. What would happen? So you have money, I have money, we have equal amount of money, we can each buy one. Is that efficient? It is efficient. Once again, remember, efficiency depends on output. As long as the product goes to someone, it is efficient. So in this case, it is an efficient outcome, each getting one. So what's the insight in this example? Now notice that we have just gone through 3 different efficient outcomes by wealth transfer, right? With this gadget by Doraemon, we have managed to give Sunil all planes, Nobita all the planes, and each of them one. In fact, that's all the outcomes possible in this case, right? Because there are only 2 planes, so there are only 3 possibilities here. Some outcomes are more equitable than others, though, right? Certainly, each of them getting one model airplane is more equitable than one of them getting both, right? So, they are all efficient outcomes, but some are more equitable, and we can reach them through wealth transfer. That's the second fundamental theorem of welfare economics, which says that any efficient outcome can be reached through wealth transfer, right? Any efficient outcome can be reached through a market equilibrium with wealth transfer. Any. We're saying that any outcome can be reached. So, you come up with an efficient outcome that you think is equitable. And I can give you a plan to transfer money between people such that that will be the outcome of the market economy. So, second fundamental theorem is a lot stronger. It says that we can achieve equity theoretically as long as we transfer money. Now, in practice, how should that be done? In practice, when you transfer money, that would mean taxation and subsidies, right? And here comes the problem. Why don't we just try to distribute wealth and achieve equity? We do try to do some of that. We tax people, we tax rich people, and we subsidize poor people. But then you face problems. One, as I mentioned, incentive distortion. If you want to transfer wealth, you have to tax. When you tax, you reduce people's incentive to work and do business, right? If you tax rich people, usually rich people take on risks too. They start a company. So generally, you only want to start a company because you're expecting big reward, right? If you tax them heavily, maybe they don't want to get anything. Next, inefficiency. It's not costless to implement redistribution, right? In Hong Kong, we need the social welfare department to do it. It's a whole government department just with the responsibility of redistributing wealth. And this process itself is not productive. It's not productive. Me taking money from you and giving to him, I'm not really bringing anything to the society other than more equitable outcomes, right? But well, in that case, the most equitable outcome would be I take money from you and I also take money from him. You have none, he has none, totally equitable. So, inefficiency. When redistributing wealth typically involves a lot of cost. And finally, corruption. When you have to entrust middlemen, for example, a government agency, to redistribute wealth, how do you ensure the government officials involved would not just take the money for themselves? And in developing countries, they do. Foreign aids to developing countries, a large part of it would have gone into the hands of officials. It's a very inefficient process. What do? It's very hard to fix. So for these reasons, so the second fundamental theorem of welfare economics is a very, very beautiful theorem in theory. But when you need to implement it, it's much more difficult because of these reasons.